that we move our new business topic up in the agenda to ahead of our old business. Are there any other proposed changes to the agenda tonight? Hearing none, I'd like to have a motion to approve the amended agenda.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Gorham. Second?
Second.
Second, Ms. Woodward. Any discussion? All right, roll call, please, Director Chansky.
Mr. Chair, we can do roll call, otherwise all members are present, so you can do a voice vote, if you would like.
All right, thank you. Then we will do all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. All right, we're rolling. All right, looking for a motion to approve the minutes from our regular meeting held on April 21st, as well as our workshop held on the 28th, if we can do those with one motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to offer an amendment to the minutes from the workshop. I don't know if I should do it now or should I do it, I think I need to do it now, don't I, before we vote on
Yeah,
it?
you may. It'd be cleaner to do that, so maybe we can either separate these or handle your amendment and,
Let's do the regular and then workshop, how's that?
Okay,
And
let's
I'll
do
make my
that.
amendment.
all right. Motion to accept the minutes from the regular meeting held on 21st of April.
Second.
All right, Erickson. Is there a second?
Yes.
Second, Gorham. All right, any discussion? All right, then same here. Okay, then at this point in time, all in favor of approving the minutes of the April 21st meeting by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. All right, now looking for Don. You had amendment to the
Just a simple
workshop.
thing, when I went through the minutes on our discussion, I believe Commissioner Woodward brought up the notion of, when we were talking about permitted uses after we went through the first three in regards to food trucks. I thought we discussed number 21, which talked about the maximum number of units per property.
Yes.
Yeah, and I don't see that noted in the minutes. If we could just amend the minutes to reflect that there was discussion on striking item 21 of 515-66-4.
Righty, thank you for that. All right, any other proposed changes to those minutes? Hearing none, looking for a motion to approve as amended, the addition of item 21. Don, did I get that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Discussion on the number of units per property. Do I have a motion to that effect?
I'll make a motion.
All right, Mr. Gorham, is there a second?
Second.
All right, Ms. Woodward, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. All right, those are approved. And now let's move to our new business item, and that is a discussion on the topic of sober homes. Before we get started on this, I just want to clarify tonight's discussion. The City Council on the 21st, or at their May meeting, May 15th meeting in 2017, have pretty much identified sober houses as a legitimate use within the city of Brainerd. And the gist of their conclusions were that the current city ordinances have the tools necessary to be able to regulate these. So at this point in time, we've not been asked by City Council to revisit that decision. So tonight's conversation really is about the implementation of the recommendations of the City Council from the 17th or 2017 meeting. So just at this point in time, I'm not looking to entertain conversation about the appropriateness of the use. That's been decided by City Council. So with that, David, could you set this topic up for us, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So as the chair stated, this issue goes back to 2017 when the topic of sober homes was first brought before the city. On February 6th of 2017, then City Planner Mark Osgard, and he brought this to the City Council's attention requesting if they would like to consider whether sober home zoning regulations should be established. At that time, Mr. Osgarden presented there were two alternatives. The first was to do nothing, which would allow sober homes of any size to operate in the city, provided building code and fire code regulations were followed. Or the other option was the city council could determine that some regulatory oversight is in the best interest of the city for health and welfare purposes and refers the issue to the planning commission for review and develop appropriate zoning ordinance language. At that time, on February 6th of 17, the council voted to refer the sober home regulation issue to the planning commission for its recommendation. On April 19th of 2017, the planning commission issued an opinion and recommendation to the city council not to regulate sober homes based on the following reasons. They had three. They said nuisance activities would be regulated under the current rental housing code. This use cannot be singled out in a way that is significantly different than other uses that would go on legally because of Supreme Court, I should say decisions, not divisions. If issues arise in the future, the commission reserves the right to look at this issue as a use similar to group homes, but at this time there's no evidence that his activity will be anywhere near as intense as a group home. As the chair pointed out, the city council upheld the commission's recommendation to reject regulating sober homes because of sufficient oversight of the use can occur in the current city code on May 15 of 17. I do want to point out quickly that in that second point, when it talks about use cannot be singled out in a way that's significantly different than other uses, what that refers to is two things. Is one, the Federal Fair Housing Act, or FFHA, which prohibits a municipality from refusing to make reasonable accommodations and rules, policies, practices, and services when they are necessary to permit handicapped persons to use and enjoy a dwelling. Additionally, the FFHA states that people recovering from a chemical dependency are also considered disabled, and therefore the FFHA prohibits discrimination against individuals on a basis of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, familial status, or disability. And because of those who are recovering from chemical dependency are considered disabled by the FFHA, the Supreme Court has ruled that individuals in recovery from chemical dependency living in congregate facilities cannot be excluded from zoning districts under family composition rules, which limit the number of unrelated persons living in the single-family dwelling. And it's based on those reasons that the commission in 2017 made the recommendation they did. A little bit kind of where we are today since that determination on May 15th. There have been a number of sober homes opened, particularly by Ms. Sheila Haverkamp. One at 215 North 10th Street, and then one at 460 Tyrell Drive. Additionally, Ms. Haverkamp has purchased and is in the process of renovating 470 Tyrell Drive to be her third sober home. North 10th Street is zoned in a B1, which does allow single-family residential dwellings as a permitted use. And then both Tyrell Drive properties are zoned in an R1A single-family residential district, which likewise allows single-family dwellings. Ms. Haverkamp's properties are licensed as single-family rentals by the city of Brainerd. She gets a single-family rental license each year, and through that she has to meet all the code requirements of the rental code, including her properties being regularly inspected. She is also registered as a housing with services establishment by the Minnesota Department of Health. And she also operates a similar sober home in Little Falls. Her homes are open exclusively to men in recovery from chemical dependency, and she does work closely with Crow Wing County in serving those recovering from chemical dependency. And at this time, since her first opening 215 North 10th at her first home, the Community Development Department, to my knowledge, and especially since as long as I've been Community Development Director, has never issued an ordinance violation to any of her properties. And also, having spoken with Police Chief Mike Bestel on the topic, and speaking as he spoke with his officers, he said neither of Ms. Haverkamp's sober homes have been, nor do they anticipate them to be, and of any concern of law enforcement perspective. And I'll leave my comments there at this time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, David. This is intended to be a discussion amongst the Planning Commission on the issue. However, it's pretty obvious there's a lot of people here that typically don't attend regular Planning Commission meeting. So I think it might be valuable to us to hear from you before we begin our discussion. So I think in an orderly way here, if people are interested in sharing comments with the Planning Commission, I have a podium up here with a microphone that you're welcome to come up and offer comment. We'd like you to state your name, your address for the record, and then if you'd address your comments to me as the chair of the committee, and we will be effective listeners. And then if probably based on the number of people here, I think I'd like to limit the amount of time that folks can testify to not more than 3 minutes. So with that, is there anyone that would like to address the commission on this topic? And again, keep in mind my opening comments that the issue of the legitimacy of the use is something that has been established by City Council, and that would be a City Council conversation and not a Planning Commission if you're looking to comment on that. So is anyone that would wish to speak to the commission at this time? You can put your hand up. Sir, if you would approach the podium, again, your name, address.
Yeah, my name is Steve Sewer. I live at 450 Tyrol Drive, and I've been there approximately 16 years now. And I guess, just so you know, I have talked with Sheila, and I've actually met some of the people that are living in the sober houses. I get what she's doing, and I commend her on her passion and her drive, because I, for one, and I'm very open about it, have been in a recovery program for nearly 32 years now. And this is just one of the steps that she's doing. So I'm not here to make disparaging remarks about any of the people that live there. My concern is this. Number one, how many people can be in the house? It's not real clear in everything that I've read. Brainerd or the family definition for zoning includes up to 4 unrelated individuals. So what is that? What is the clarification on that? That's number one. The other one, and you already answered that one, that they have to go through an inspection on an annual basis. Everything has to be up to code. And I'm assuming that includes if you have X amount of bedrooms, there's certain requirements for a number of bathrooms also or not. That would be another question on that. And I don't know if any of these are going to be answered here tonight or not, or are they going to be? Are they?
Well, we're certainly going to probably come up in conversation here.
Okay.
I think the commission is looking to be informed and educated on some of these as well. Thank you.
Okay. Some of these I'm going to refer to what the St. Paul City Ordinance says regarding sober homes. In one of them, they said the maximum total number of residents permitted in a sober house shall be specified by the fire certificate occupancy. Property containing 1 or more sober house units shall be a minimum distance of 330 feet from any other property containing a sober house. And I looked a little bit further into that, and it is property line to property line, not building to building. But my biggest concern is this. Tyrol Hills is not what you would call a typical standard neighborhood. For instance, North Brainerd. You've got like a 10-block area going east-west to approximately a 4-block area deep. Tyrol Hills consists of about 2 total blocks just because it's one circle. I believe there's 28 homes in there. And most of us have talked about it, and the general consensus, and I will speak for those that aren't here for that matter on that, we just feel like 2 is enough. Now, I agree. I've been there a long time, and we've never had a police call, and I work directly with law enforcement throughout Crow Wing County. There's never been a call. I've met several of the residents. They're good people. And I'm glad to see them in recovery. That's the only way I got my life back. And I continue to be involved in it. So, and like I said, I'm not here to make disparaging remarks about that.
Thank you, Mr. Sewer, and that's your 3 minutes.
I got one more point. Can I make it
You
quick?
may quickly, thank you.
Okay, I will. The only other thing that concerns me is several of us, and I don't know how many, but I have been contacted, my wife and I, twice already. When we go to sell our house, please call Sheila first. We've already got a couple people in line for that, but other people in the neighborhood have been contacted too. Now, I appreciate her drive, her ambition, her passion, everything about that. And it is a for-profit business that she does run. However, again, how many is enough? You know, there's got to be some kind of distance restrictions, I would believe on, and I would like you to consider looking at that.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would wish to speak to the commission? Yes.
Jan Lambert, 426 Tyrell Drive. Again, I agree with what Steve had said, but for me, the most important issue is the occupancy of the house. We're single family. The issue I believe would not be as hard as if we were more in a normal occupancy of those houses. I understand if there's a family of 12 people, there's nothing you can do about it because they're all related. But my concern is the amount of people within one house. And I think that's something we've kind of missed the boat on, and I'd like you to consider to help us out with that. And I do think if we had an occupancy rate that was probably more of a normal, more to a character of a neighborhood, I do not believe how many was in the neighborhood would be that much of an issue if we could have a consideration of the occupancy. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lambert. Is there anyone else that would like to address the commission on this topic? Yes, sir.
My biggest concern is what we're going to do.
Name and address, please.
Dale Anselment, 462 Tyrell Drive. I want to know what we're going to do with parking down there. You got 9 in one house, you're going to have 12 in another. It's 21 people going back and forth up and down the street with motorcycles, snowmobiles. Well, this winter, the snowplow actually had to stop, go in and move a car so they can plow that street. Now, that's got to be stopped. We got to get some parking set up there. If they're going to have a business, they got to have a parking lot. They got to make one in the backyard or something. You know what I'm saying? We had a hell of a time with snow last winter because they're parked in front of everything and the plow comes and he's got it 6 feet away from the curb. So, I mean, that's a problem. It's got to be addressed. So that's my main concern.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Anselman. Is there anyone else that would like to address the commission? I will accept this one.
I'm Bob Togis, 8853 Paradise Beach Road in Brainerd. Through my employment, I've kind of started with them in their infancy, and with the Burlington House that was in North Brainerd. And I understand that people have concerns about who your neighbors are, but I can also tell you that having them in a controlled setting is much more efficient. I mean, she's another set of eyes for our department. She does an excellent job. Her philosophy is, I wouldn't want anybody to live in a house that I wouldn't live in myself. And if you go on the properties, they're well maintained, and there's just a lot of good that's coming out of them. They also have support for each other in these programs. They go to meetings together. It's something that this community desperately needs. I'm not going to go into, and say I'm a zoning expert. We have parking issues on our road in the summer times too. There's things that are gonna come up that are not perfect, I understand that. And there's things that people are gonna get upset about. And I think if they talk with her, she's very approachable. You know, if you guys could talk and work through these, okay, there's some motorcycles that are going through the road. If they could sit down as neighbors and sit down and say, we would like to address these issues, we could. I think that would be something that would be very easy to do. And I do appreciate some of the individuals saying, you know what, I support the program. But we can't support the program and say, but I don't want it around me. You know, I understand that there are concerns, but from our end of it, I should say from my end of it, she's a blessing, you know, because she cares about people. And when we go in there and we have an issue with somebody, she calls me up the next day and says, Bobby, you know what, there was an issue, we had this happen last night. I never put a high-risk parole release in that facility. It's not appropriate. Any of my people that go there are doing well. We're putting them into a community. I'm not going to put somebody that's not doing well and has an offense that's not appropriate for that setting. So the people that I have that are in that residence are appropriate for it. And I'm very open to anybody that wanted to speak with me and say, hey, this individual's in there, he's under your supervision. I don't feel it's appropriate. They can call me anytime. So again, I'm not going to get into the zoning issues, this and that. I know it's not perfect. Life's not perfect. South St. Paul might have these policies. It's Brainerd, Minnesota. You know, I mean, it's a little bit different from those ends. If anybody has any questions about anybody that I ever have on supervision, please call me because I'm more than willing to field phone calls, and that's what helps me do my job.
Thank you. Bob?
Bob.
And Bob?
Bob Tauges.
Bob, what's your last name again, please?
Tauges. Tauges.
Very good, very good. Thank you. All right. Is there anyone else that would care to speak? Yes, Ms. Haverkamp.
Good evening, Chairman, Commission members, and ladies and gentlemen, and Sheila Haverkamp. And I felt it only appropriate to come and share a little bit because obviously me and my husband Gene, my son Joe, as well as other family members are very involved. And in large part because our family has been deeply affected by individuals with substance use disorders, including a 29-year-old brother who died. And I always wondered, why do we do the same things without changing our ways? And when I bought this house in Brainerd, I did not know I was being led to open a sober home. Not at all. I thought I was giving back to Brainerd by fixing up one house. And I wasn't sure if it was going to be a rental or if we were going to sell it or what we were going to do. But in the meantime, I had an opportunity to go to the cities with my girlfriend who was visiting her daughter in a sober home. And it's like a light bulb went on that instead of releasing individuals, you know, from jails and prisons or treatment facilities, and oftentimes with nowhere to go except to their old environment, we need to have offerings here in the Brainerd community. And that's how it all began. We are now almost 5 years in to running our sober homes, and we have waiting lists, significant waiting lists. We have men calling regularly, can I please just sleep on your couch? I'm desperate for not having to sleep outside in the cold or on the streets or in a tent. And I need people around me that will support me in my recovery. And that's why the houses have gotten to a point where we find that it works best in that 10 to 12 number of individuals. All of our houses have 7 to 9 bedrooms each. If they don't have it when we buy it, we're building it out. We're meeting all local building codes as well as state building codes. We never have more than one person in a bedroom space that isn't identified by the state building code requirements. And so if we question ourselves, like, is this room acceptable for 2 people? We bring the building inspector out, we have him help measure, make sure that we are exceeding. In fact, several of our houses could have significant more people, but we opt not to because we want to create a home-like environment that supports these individuals in their journey. I don't know, Steve asked me, are you gonna buy another house in Tyrrell Hills? I do not know that. Like I shared with Steve, What I do almost every day is I study the real estate market. We have to be in homes that are close to services for these men. When we look in Little Falls, when we look in Brainerd, it's always within a district that we're close to job opportunities, stores, community service for probation officers, social services, whatever it might be that these men need, their meetings, et cetera. Most of them, I would say probably on average, between 25 to 50% of the men that live in our homes have vehicles. And every property we have, there's a second, like what I call back entrance, so off of an alleyway and or a second road where we can put overflow of cars so that we don't have to take up too much space on the roadway, even though it's legally required or legally acceptable that we park on the road. We don't park in designated areas. And we will go in and ask men, please move your car to the lower level, especially if they're not driving it every day. And when we did have, the neighbors express concern about the snowplows having to go around because a car was parked, I said, men, get out there and help this household get that snow out of the way. And several of them did go outside and shovel. And when we have a motorcycle going too fast, and I have a neighbor who tells me the motorcycle is going a little too loud and it's a Harley, and you got to understand a Harley comes with some noisemakers on them, right? I want you going out of this neighborhood as quiet as possible. I just had to tell one of my guys, it's like, you will turn your radio down until you're out of the Tyrell Hills neighborhood. And he went on to tell me what the city code is for noise. I said, I don't care what the city code is for noise. You will follow the rules, please, because we got to be nice neighbors, right? And part of what we do is try to help men to learn to live well, right? And some of our men are very sophisticated. I've had people, me and my son Joe and Jean, we've had people from 18 years old up to 72 years old. We've had people with an 8th grade education. I've also had a doctorate degreed individual, including bachelor's and master's and doctorate degreed individuals. I would tell you that alcoholics and addicts come from all walks of life. It is a disease that is not discriminatory. And some people, by the time they get to us, their life has been a challenge. And in our minds and in our hearts and in our efforts, we want to help these men find a way back into society and live with pride and be able to support themselves and be good people. I would tell you that many of our men are working and creating employee opportunities for our employers. One week, a couple weeks ago, I got up every morning at 5 in the morning to go pick up 2 men who work in Brainerd's Industrial Park because their normal driver was on vacation, just so that they could get to that manufacturer and keep their jobs. We have guys biking significantly all over the community to try to meet their needs. But yet I do respect people's concern about, what is too many in one neighborhood. I would tell you that I think 10 to 12 guys is fine, and most of the time, if any of you would come and have coffee, and I always extend invitation to everybody to come in and have coffee, you will find that there is hardly a soul in the house. That's what it feels like, because if you're there at 8 in the morning, half of them have gone off to work. If you're there at 8 at night, half of them are in meetings or treatment. They're in outpatient treatment programs. So the houses do not feel full. In fact, some of the time it's like, who am I here to visit? There's not anybody around. So just a lot of good things we're doing, and yet we want to be kind and respectful and try to honor people's requests as much as possible.
Right. Thank you.
And so with that, I'm always available to answer questions or sit and have a conversation to say, how do we make it a win-win? Because we're open to that as well.
Thank you, Ms. Heldkamp.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to address? Yes, sir. If you'll come up with your name, your address.
I'm Bruce Janowick. I live at 448 Tyrell Drive. I would like to reiterate what Steve said also, basically reinforce what Steve says. We stand behind the sober house philosophy 100%. I have not been through treatment, so I can't share the experiences like that some people can. having heard about the sober houses in our neighborhood, I've spent 8 to 16 hours on the computer trying to figure out what I can about sober homes. And in general, it's very positive. Sober homes seem to be implemented originally in California back in about 1988, if I remember correctly. And that seemed to be where I focused is, okay, here's somebody that's been doing it for quite a few years. Are there issues? Have there been problems with it? And the biggest issues that I've seen is where there's an overconcentration of sober homes in a particular area. Hence the separation of 300 feet or 600 feet, or I've seen a quarter of a mile. It varies across the country. St. Paul has been cited, has been proactive in instituting guidelines for that. Minneapolis has elected not to do that. I guess it would be, my biggest concern is that I've got a fair amount of money into my home. I don't want to see it devalue. From what I've seen around the country, overconcentration of these in a neighborhood does cause homes to devalue. That's my primary concern. The other thing is that people that are in the sober homes there are there to get through that next phase, to move on and get back to life as normal. What I've seen a lot in my research on the internet is that an overconcentration interferes with that. You get too many of them there, it brings in a lot of negative things into the neighborhood. So for them to go through the healing process, they need a healthy neighborhood. A healthy neighborhood means to be a neighborhood that still has got the integrity of being a decent residential neighborhood. Overconcentration, I believe, interferes with that. It would be my recommendation that your planning commission spend some time, maybe get in touch with St. Paul if you haven't already, look at some of these other communities, and let's be proactive in heading off the issue. I'm not saying I don't want them, I'm just saying let's be proactive in coming up with some kind of regulation that says here's the optimum number for what we can expect a good return on. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would wish to speak to the commission on this topic? James, do we have any online individuals? Okay, thank you. That was just me talking to myself in the echo then, right? Okay, nice. Anyone else care to address the commission before we begin our discussion? Last call. All right, well, thank you very much for those comments and that perspective that you've all shared. It helps us to think about the issues that I think we need to either ensure are currently being addressed, or maybe we can identify opportunities to make recommendations to City Council. So with that, maybe bring that back to the table here for the commission. Maybe we could start out, David, could you perhaps offer some information to us on the commission here on how we're currently addressing the regulation of these kinds of requests?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. So how sober homes are regulated today in the city of Brainerd is that they're regulated through the Rental Housing Maintenance Code, which is section 425 of the city code. Again, per the guidelines in the Federal Fair Housing Act, they are allowed in single-family homes and are then licensed as single-family dwellings, even though they have multiple occupants. They don't have to be considered multifamily units. So in that perspective, they are allowed in pretty much any residential district. Annually, anyone who owns and operates a sober home, for example, Ms. Haverkamp, has to get a rental license. They run from June 1st to May 31st each year. As part of that, they do get inspected regularly. It's kind of a rotating cycle of inspecting all rentals. They get inspected by the housing inspector as well as the fire marshal. So the two of them, they inspect them for making sure they comply with the rental code, building code, and then also the fire code. When it comes to, I'll answer some of the, I think I can answer, give some baseline answers to a couple of the questions that were raised by members of our community tonight. First, on how many people can be in a house or the occupancy, that is determined by section in the rental code, which is reflected of the building code. 425.810 is it's titled Required Space in Dwelling Units. This determines the space of specifically bedrooms, and then how big a bedroom has to be for how many people are sleeping in it. So for as many as Ms. Haverkamp can only put as many people in her homes as she has space for per the code. She has to take her bedrooms. Our staff, they evaluate the size of those bedrooms, and then based off of that, she's determined how many people she can have in that house, and the fire marshal authorizes that as well. So that is what determines occupancy. I would like to point out that there's, I think some have alluded to, in the definition section, and I'll pull it out, of section 425, it does define, and I just had it here, hold on, I have to find it, here we go. It does define family. It defines family as two or more persons, each related to the other by blood, marriage, adoption, or foster care, a group home, not more, or a group of not more than 4 persons, not so related, maintaining a common household and using common cooking and kitchen facilities. So in the general definition of the rental code, it says you can't have more than 4 unrelated people. However, again, going back to the Federal Fair Housing Act, because of how the act defines those who live in such congregated facilities, it has stated that they are essentially exempt from that rule. They cannot be restricted using definition of family to restrict the number of people in a home. So for that perspective, they are exempt from that definition of no more than 4 unrelated people. Again, how are they managed? I talked about 425. When it comes to other things such as conduct on premises, other ordinance related things, our staff enforces that. There's conduct on premises issues, which is defined in the code, that is enforced by the police department, just like any other rental. If there are other ordinance violations, the community development department would enforce those. So if we get complaints about long grass, junk and debris, those kind of things, our department would enforce those just like any other property, be it a rental or a owner-occupied dwelling. Also, because they are under 425, if there are continued violations of the code, if they have continued conduct on premises or continued other violations of the code, a recommendation can be made by the Community Development Department to the City Council to revoke or suspend their rental license, which would then effectively close the sober home. So if there are issues that come up, the rental code does give a means by which they can be dealt with and the sober home closed if necessary. The questions were raised are talking about proximity of homes to each other. Our ordinance does not address that. It doesn't say that sober homes, again, it doesn't speak directly to sober homes, so it does not say that there only can be one every so many acres or every so many blocks. It does not define that. As for parking, again, they fall under the same regulations as all off-street parking in the city and based off of the area that they are in. And again, looking at the FFHA and decisions made by the Supreme Court, when it comes to things like off-street parking, they have to have the same, they have to be treated the same as to essentially everything else around them. So if there are other single-family homes around them, they have to be treated the same. They can't have a more restrictions on them in that manner than the rest of them. So if on-street parking is allowed, then they get to use that on-street parking, just like anyone else in that area. Again, and that as well is also enforced by the police department. And just like the rest of our code says that no vehicle can be parked on the street anywhere more than 48 hours, at which part it may be ticketed and potentially towed, and that is enforced by the police department like it would be in any other area. I think that addresses, the 4 questions that I heard, Mr. Chair. If there's anything else from the commission that you would like to answer, I can do so now.
Any of the members have questions in follow-up to David's information here?
I guess I have one, the idea, Mr. Chair, of that in St. Paul, they have regulations you could do, that create separation. Is this something that could be easily fit into our zoning code as it is? Or would it, I'm just trying to get a sense of how difficult it would be to add something like that to the code.
I'll say first, Commissioner Gorham, Mr. Chair, that I haven't looked into exactly how St. Paul does that, but how it would fit if the commission decided to make that recommendation to the council to amend the code that way is likely what we'd have to do, would make, right now, sober homes, they're not called out specifically in the zoning code, they're just treated like a single-family dwelling. So we'd have to call out sober homes specifically, and then likely within that use, say there cannot be more than, one sober home for every, whatever the distance unit you want to use.
Thank you.
Other questions of staff?
Mr. Chair.
Woodward.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chansky, if there is a provision put in there stating how much distance there can be between sober homes, does that violate that FFHA?
Commissioner Woodward, Mr. Chair, I would have to do more research on that. I'll admit, in my preparation for the night, I was looking mostly at what does our code say today and kind of the history. I would have to do more research as to what we could do that would fit. Again, obviously, the St. Paul has it. I don't know what their whole process was to put that in there. I'd have to do more research and ask the city attorney as well, run that past him, what would be an acceptable regulation in that manner.
Director Chansky, if these are registered properties with the Department of Health, if I understand correctly, if these were a licensed assisted living facility, would that fall under our definition of a state licensed residential facility, subject to limitations that are vary depending on the residential district? Do you have an opinion or thought on that?
And I did, Assistant Planner James Cromwick and I did discuss this a little bit, and honestly, based off of what we were seeing in the FFHA, actually our concern was that our restriction of how many individuals can live in a residential care facility, we actually had concerns that the FFHA actually excludes that, and that we actually, our code might not actually, potentially might not be meeting the requirements of the FFHA. So actually I'd have to look at how the FFHA relates to those care facilities before I can answer how would that then relate to sober homes. Again, how I see here is it seems pretty much restricted to, things like the building code and the fire code, then, unless we're restricting everything else around them. But I'd have to do more research as to how it all relates to, how is a residential care facility different than a sober home and things like that.
And these feel thematically similar to a state licensed residential facility, and at some threshold of density, it requires a conditional use, which then opens discussion about parking, which is something we've heard tonight. So I'm just trying to think through what things do we currently have that are applicable in our city ordinance that would have some guidance and assistance in addressing the questions and how we can explain, the residential density other than the number of rooms, the number of code compliant rooms. And then I think similarly, boarding houses where you have a density of individuals that those additionally require a conditional use permit. That again allows an opportunity to think through the issues of parking and related things that might spin out of high levels of occupancy. So there are some, I think, parallels in the ordinance that can help us think about, either they actually apply and we can use them, or they help offer guidance to us on how we might be able to address some of the themes that we heard in tonight's testimony. So I think those are a couple places that I would be thinking about. You know, have we explored this issue with the city attorney as far as how the legal precedent and the case law applies to Brainerd that you're citing? Have we explored that at all, or thought through, you know, do they directly apply, or are there nuances of discovery and things that we have to go through in the city to figure out how to apply that precedent?
At this time, we haven't. At this time, obviously, we've just been operating off the direction that was given in 2017, because prior to the discussion tonight and the discussions leading up to this, we have not had an issue with any sober home in the city that would then prompt that discussion.
And I like the way that Ms. Averkamp described the operational philosophy, you know, and so I think that can give us some comfort in the openness to speak as neighbors. From the city's perspective, another operator may not have the same philosophy, may not have the same openness and willingness to problem solve. And so I think we need to think through, you know, we have the benefit right now of, I think, a conscientious operator, but what is the longer strategy for the city as we look at some of these, an expansion perhaps of this kind of a use in the city beyond just her operations. So looking for other thoughts or questions on this, or some input. I don't want to turn this into a monologue by any means. So.
Well, as
Mr.
Mr. Chair, as I was thinking through this, it really is going to come down to what the city's allowed to do under the Federal Fair Housing Act. And as I've been hearing and as I've read through the packet, you know, it really seems that proximity and number of occupancy, maybe not even number of occupancy, but are kind of the only tools that we might have as far as some regulation. Mr. Chair, your concept of perhaps defining sober home as assisted living, if I understood you correct, I would even question if we're even able to do that, given the Federal Fair Housing's definition of sober homes falling under disabled. So yeah, until we hear more from, I guess, the attorney on those definitions, I'm not sure, I guess, what we can do at this point. I think that the parking issues are absolutely a valid concern, especially given the type of neighborhood. And so I think we need to work through some of those, but we've got a matrix to work through as far as the Federal Fair Housing Act and these definitions, so I guess until we hear more on those, I certainly value the service and the recovery for these young men, and or it doesn't sound like young men, even men of all ages. So, and I agree. I think the neighborhood working together with the operators here, I think they can make some strides. But again, the parking is certainly an issue, and then just seeing what we can do as far as what we're allowed to do under that federal definition.
Thank you, Mr. Erickson. Comments or thoughts?
Mr. Chair, yeah, it's a thorny sort of issue here. I don't want us to be solving a problem that doesn't exist, and I wonder that. I appreciate the the concern about concentration, about having two homes. Sheila, would the homes be adjacent to each other? Is that what you're proposing? They're separated? How far are they separated? Approximately?
If I'm not mistaken, they're about 400 to 500 feet from property line to property line. I think there's 4 houses in between. There's 3 houses in between? There's 4. That's what I thought. There's 4 houses, and each of the lots in that area are 100-foot lots.
It's 280 feet from property line to property line in Tyrol Hills.
Okay, just,
There's a plat right here.
Yeah, you can do it.
Okay.
it's just focus, if you would
I thought it was
focus the
3 to
comments.
4. I thought it was 4, but, so we can get that information, but it's 300, maybe 400 feet from property line to property line.
Okay.
So they're not directly adjacent. And what's really fascinating to me, and we look for this when we buy homes, it's not easy to find the home, to be honest with you. We look for a secondary parking. And so all of our homes in Brainerd have a second parking. So, in Tyrol Hills case, all of our homes and our properties abut what I call Second Street, which is the street that goes to the turnaround. It's a cul-de-sac in the back. And so all of ours have parking in the back. And other neighbors use it too. So, I mean, if the neighbors prefer us never to allow somebody to park on the street, we can consider that. I pull in on the street once in a while, I'll be honest with you. I have a trailer and I'm picking up stuff and I want to be able to pull along the street. And the other thing I want to say about values, I would also share with you that I just
want to say, I think you answered my question.
Okay.
So thank you so much.
All right.
I just wanted to know whether we're talking 2 houses right next
No.
to each other or not. We're
Nope.
not. That helps me right there.
Thank you.
I think there's some real issues, and then there's some perceived issues. In terms of parking on the street, if it's legal to park on the street, park on the street. I park on the street because I don't have off-street parking in my house. I don't understand why there's a problem parking on streets. Streets are meant to be parked on. So I don't see an issue there, personally. Yeah, so I guess those are my thoughts for now. I'll let anybody else chip in.
Thank you, Mr. Gorham.
Can I give this to you?
I'm sorry?
Can I give this to him?
The map?
Yeah, there's,
All right, sure.
or we could,
208 feet. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I do have another
Mr.
question
Erickson.
for Sheila, if I might.
yep.
Sheila, you think you mentioned that you find that the ideal number, this is the density question, is 10 to 12.
Correct.
Can you elaborate on that? Why is that the ideal? Or
You know, here's an example, and it makes me really sad. I had a man, we did, because we're in a partnership, had a man who left last week, one of our homes, and he went into his own apartment on Thursday night. By Saturday morning, he's calling, he's drinking. And it's so sad because if men, they need this, what I call this support group, this sense of family, this not being alone by themselves, and then they turn back to their bottle or the bar or their drug friends for companionship. And like I said, you know, if there's, at first we started with 6 men, and it was lonely because one's doing treatment, and when you get a 10 to 12, you seem to get like a couple different groups that tend to get along, that have similar interests, similar ages, and then they start to support each other and create a sense of family and partnership. That's what we have found. It just seems to work well.
okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Ms. Haverkamp, if I could, while you're on that question, are you aware of any professional guidance or research studies? That's probably a reach, but that get at this notion of that critical mass number. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
To say, what is that number? Your experience, your experiences are valuable because that's
Right.
firsthand observation, but are there also guidelines and things that the profession uses to say, you know, to get at that notion of people not falling back on old habits?
Right.
You would need a core of this, and are you aware of anything that exists to that effect?
I don't have a study, but I've been trying to do a lot of studying because I'd like to be able to start speaking and sharing knowledge and information with others. But I would tell you in St. Paul's case, they don't require a conditional use permit for a sober home until they hit a 17 mass or more. So they find even 16 people, 17 plus people in one home. I know here in our community, the Board and Lodge, Bergstallers, has 20 plus. They're out, and that's in Northeast Brainerd in a single-family neighborhood. And so I don't know that magical number. That's what we have found. We've been asked to acquire some properties that are much bigger, that have a lot more men or capacity to hold more men. And we haven't decided we wanted to take our model there either, because we find this core group tend to create a sense of family and support each other. And I could tell you so many success stories, but obviously not all of them. And so I don't, you know, it's kind of like, I want to write a book, The Many Faces of Alcoholism and Addictions, because I can't tell you, here's the exact model of what works and what doesn't work and how we help people in their journey. The men could probably tell you better than I could, as far as your question went.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments or observations? Well, hearing none, I think what I'm hearing, David, is there's probably some questions that we can do some follow-up on and maybe bring that research or your conversations with the city council and or city attorney council, and maybe come back and report that back to the commission at a future date, and we can decide, you know, how we're best positioned, what a logical next step may be. Is that a reasonable course of action? Seeing general head nods from the table here. So if I can ask you to come back there, and I don't know that we need to entertain a motion to do that, but I think from this perspective, let's do that.
I have pretty good direction, Mr. Chair.
Say that, please.
I have pretty good direction.
Okay, very good. All righty. Well, with that, thank you very much for the conversation, folks. Thank you very much for coming out tonight and sharing your perspectives and your experiences and your knowledge. So.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly.
Okay.
The chair.
If everyone's exiting, we have a minute.
Okay. We're going to take a brief recess here, reconvene at 7:03.
It looks like with all the chatting, it's not going to be quiet.
Yeah, I'll get around. I'm doing a transfer investigation, you know, and he probably told you that. Because he's on probation. And I'm really proud of these guys, they come here from out of town, they go to Teen Challenge, and then they drop here, you know? Because I had a lot of bad experiences, but he's, I think, the real deal, so I'm gonna accept his case. I know, I do too. And the other thing, I have only met him over the phone, but I talked to him for 2 years. I have all these crises. I know he's not
To look into
a drug expert.
As it is right now, from what I understand right now, is the Federal Fair Housing Act says we can't discriminate based on that beyond. Nice to meet you.
When Jeff was in there, I just played him to death, but only because his wife worked at Hallmark when I worked there. So you're gonna get played.
That's okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And you sent to a lab or just do an instant?
I just do an instant. So I'm actually moving to the swab test versus just because they're swinging. I know I'm starting to do more and more POs.
Yeah.
It's like, wow.
I know, you know, it's.
This is just
Yeah.
gonna be fun.
Right, yeah. So, you know, also, the day before, and he was worried about, I can't get a job because of that, anyway.
We'll sit over here. I'm gonna say hi to David.
Dan, how goes it?
Fine. How about you?
It's crazy.
And
It's
then,
busy.
yes, and if you really wanted a job, you
That's the trade I
yeah,
get from.
right, right.
If you're not afraid
Yeah,
of work, I
right.
can find you a
Oh.
job.
A lot of it's just it's coming again.
One guy is serious. And I would have to start showing
Bill, are you free, please?
the situation.
Yes, I've been reviewing it. Doing one piece.
Tell you why he.
That was Mike and I talking about.
Yeah, why not?
Exactly why.
It wasn't really, because he had one experience. Don't work out.
Based off of.
Yeah, all right. No.
You
Well,
try to get it.
what if that's what I told? I guess it's similar to him making a mistake in my house. I could just be done with him, but
Yeah.
then I'm
Right.
failing him. You
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
not giving him.
And so, you know, I told him.
I haven't heard about it.
Yeah, I think you need to get a job. And if there's a reason, you should be telling us why.
Here's my thoughts on that: is some of these guys need to work on their sobriety first.
Yeah, and I agree
Once
with
they
you.
start working, I mean, it becomes so overwhelming. Or guys, what do I do? Yeah, and then they're using. I get a lot of guys who get a job and within 2 weeks
How are you?
kicked out of the house because they're using it and they already lost.
It's so weird.
One paycheck and it's a full.
It's like sort of uncomfortable, but I'm kind of getting used to it.
To my knowledge, since he's been in my house and
I have mine because I'm like, it's like my comfort. It's a security blanket.
I have one.
My mask.
I don't need to stay. No, I'm just thinking.
Got him right under the AC vent.
I know.
You're gonna freeze.
everybody's journey is a little bit different.
Oak Street Chapel? Have you heard anything?
Is that the white?
Oh, there's 5. Miss Teresa's here. She's just in the bathroom probably, but she's here. Yeah, I was cutting her, but I was finding the clerk.
There's discussion about,
Oh, no, we haven't. This one goes down by like 6, 7.
Yeah, I don't.
I was only on to move out of house.
So I.
So I'm out.
Go ahead. Stopped by a lot of people trying to get
All right, I'm gonna call, I'm gonna call this back to order, and proceed with our agenda. Our next agenda item is, a final plating action. David, could you, set this up for us, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So Eric and Don Myra, they submitted a request for final plat for a replat of Outlot B in Brainerd Oaks Edition. Purpose of this final plat is to replat Outlot B as Lot 1, Block 1 of Myra Edition to Brainerd Oaks. As a reminder, this preliminary plat came before the Planning Commission back on April 21st. At that time, they recommended approval of the preliminary plat with no changes or alterations, and that preliminary plat was approved by the City Council on May 3rd, which then gave the Myras the ability to submit for final plat. In your packet, you do have a final plat, as well as the previous certificate of survey on this property. Again, because this is a replat or a plat of what was once an outlot, it is now going to be, has to be its own plat versus being tied into the Greater Brainerd Oaks plat. So it is being replatted as as Lot 1, Block 1, Myra Addition to Brainerd Oaks, as you can see in the final plat in the packet. Per section 500-5-2C, consideration of final plat shall be made upon the following requirements being met. It specifically says that of the City Council, but really I think it also applies to the Planning Commission before you can recommend to the Council to adopt it. And there's 4. It says the final plat shall substantially conform to the approved preliminary plat and phasing plan. This one does. It is pretty much unaltered. There's no alterations, again, to the dimensions of this lot. It stayed as the same dimensions as the original outlot. Completed development contract, including all required financial securities and time frame for final plat and final grading. The city is not requiring a development contract for this replat. Conditions attached to approval of the preliminary plat shall be fulfilled or secured by the development agreement as appropriate. The only concern that was brought up about the plat originally is we had it as a different lot and block. We did have that fixed because again, it's a replat, needed to be its own replat of a former outlot, so needed to have its own lot and block number. And again, that's been changed to Lot 1, Block 1, Myra addition to Brainerd Oaks. And then all fees and charges and escrow related to the preliminary or final plat be paid in full, and the applicant has paid all fees in full. Mr. Chair, staff recommends approval of the final plat for Lot 1, Block 1, Myra addition to Brainerd Oaks, and I'll take any questions that the commission has this time. And I'll just add, because this is a final plat, no public hearing is required.
Thank you, Director Jansky. Any questions of staff before we move on? Okay. And, you know, personally, I would take this, and I would frame it and put it over the fireplace, because there's really, I don't think too many people can say they have their own subdivision name, and you're Lot 1, Block 1, baby, and that's it.
It wasn't my recommendation. I got a new one here with showing where the house is gonna be at and everything. It conforms with the setback.
So thank you for that. Well, at this point in time, you know, unless there's anything that you'd like to offer us, Mr. Myrie, I think I'm ready to look for a motion to approve the final plat for the Myra addition to Brainerd Oaks.
I'd like to make a motion to approve it as listed.
Thank you. Motion by Woodward.
Second.
Second by Erickson. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. All right, that is approved.
And Mr.
David,
Chair,
next steps, please.
The final plat approval to the city council will be going before the city council on June 7th.
Very good. Thank you for your patience during tonight's meeting. Your business was quick, but maybe this was interesting leading up to yours.
Yeah.
Right?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next agenda topic is the text amendment for Transient Food Overlay District, Food Unit Overlay District. David, could you set this up for us, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So during your workshop on April 28th, staff led the commission through a discussion on 3 areas of the ordinance that we believed could be used revising. In the end, the commission had consensus on the following revisions. One was operating times, to change the operating times from the listed district-based times to a universal operating time of 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Additionally, you can discuss the operational areas allowed for transient food units. Currently, there are a number of zones that they are allowed to operate in. The commission had consensus to change that. We'll consider amending it to allow transient food units to operate in any commercial district except the B1 neighborhood office district, as well as industrial districts, all industrial districts, as well as properties owned by Central Lakes College and the Franklin Arts Center. And then the third area that you looked at to amend and agreed to amend was section 515-66-4.16, which restricts the operation of transient food units to being no closer to a restaurant or bar that serves food than 300 feet from their property line. Upon staff's recommendation, the Planning Commission agreed to consider eliminating that restriction in its entirety. I want to point out to Commissioner Gorham's about section 21, how I believe, yes, you did discuss that. I believe the consensus was, how I understood it at that time, you'll see it's not represented in the proposed ordinance, was to leave it as it was, and then if it became an issue or things, then the commission can come back and amend that if necessary. But it hadn't been an issue yet. So from my understanding was at that time was to just leave it as is, and if it does become an issue, it could be addressed. But it can be addressed tonight if you want it to be.
Maybe I'll just ask my other commissioner members. I thought we had a consensus on it. Was that wrong? Maybe we just agreed to kick it down the road. Was that the consensus? We're going to kick it down the road. I'll defer to you, I may be remembering wrong.
I'm struggling to, Mr. Chair, I'm struggling to remember as well. It currently reads, how
Give me
many
just a
trucks?
second, I'll pull
One
it
and a
up.
half acre, 2 1 acre, and then
Yeah.
3, and there's a third part there.
So it's
Two food
two
trucks.
trucks for a half acre or less, 3 food trucks on lots between 1/2 acre and 1 acre, and 4 food trucks on lots greater than 1 acre.
I think the consensus that I gathered was that none of us felt that that was necessary to have in there, but for some reason we decided to kick the can down the road. But I can see it coming up as an issue. I can also see it just being extra somethings in there that are going to prevent more business from occurring, that we could have that additional business in our city if we're not so restrictive.
Yeah.
As I blow the dust off of my recollection from such a short time ago, that's the really sad part, but
Yes.
how we reallocate our disk space. But we did use the example of the Franklin Arts Center, and we talked about what would it be like, and we talked about maneuverability within that. And I think as we thought through the example, and we said, well, gosh, you've got the farmer's market there, and that seems to all work just fine. You know, that doesn't get all tangled up as a result. So I just, to be honest with you, I cannot recall what the conclusion was, but this is the opportunity if we say, you know, we can allow it to stand and go forward and address problems in the future as they may arise. This does not govern, I'm struggling for the word, David, the event-related permits. This condition would not apply to the event.
Correct. This is just
So
general
if I
operating.
had 4th of July, you know, at Chairman Mike's, you know, that's under a different permit, and we would manage it in that way, and it wouldn't be held to this particular standard.
We could have
Correct.
20 trucks nose to nose.
Yeah, correct.
Depending on how popular my parties are, man.
And if I can, Mr. Chair, I think part of that other discussion was that I think we, the staff might have brought up that we've never had, I don't think we've ever actually had 2 food trucks operating on the same lot. And a lot of times it comes, could be under the discretion of the property owner as well if they would like to have 2. Again, we have 4 licensed food trucks right now, and I think at least 2 of them have the Franklin Arts Center listed. 3, so 3 of the 4 have the Franklin Arts Center listed as an operating spot, but they're all on separate days. So none of them would be there at that time. Or so far, right now.
Mr. Chair, I'll just conclude my thought by saying, on one hand, this is an opportunity to do it, as far as just don't kick the can down the road, just do it right now. On the other hand, it's probably not a big issue, and maybe the less on the plate that we present to the city council, the easier it will be for the city council to digest. I'll leave it right there.
All right, Mr. Erickson.
I'll weigh in on that too. I personally would probably prefer to take the opportunity. However, I agree. I see this as an opportunity to say, we'll pump the brakes a little bit. We've already opened this up quite a bit. And we've got that to kind of hold back and say, we'll see how it goes. And then on the other side, knowing a little bit about the food truck industry and how it's evolved is that they do congregate and it's kind of like the whole variety, you know, you want a lot of variety, so the more the better. So there's both sides of the issues. I'll conclude my thoughts by saying, I think we kind of leave it as is, and we can say, you know, we can show that we've kind of pumped the brakes a little bit and said we've changed it enough, we'll see how it goes, especially given that we're short 3 members. I think I wouldn't want to make that change. I mean, we do have a quorum, so I guess we could, but I guess I would support just leaving it as is for the moment.
All right, thank you, Mr. Erickson. And I think we can come back to this as after the public hearing and just wrap this up and, you know, make that final decision. David, in the ordinance amendment document, I wanted to call your attention to a couple of items. Under section 2, you're listing the Lincoln Arts Center instead of the Franklin Arts Center. And then Independent School District I-81 or 181, regardless of zoning district, it seems to be an addition since the workshop. I don't remember that being part of our conversation. Did I miss that?
So we discussed
It's
that.
an
and-
opportunity, but I don't,
Yeah, we discussed, I think we maybe alluded to it. We did add that in there, again, for an potential item of discussion, was we're already having, when we're looking at the Franklin Arts Center, which actually is partially owned by ISD 181, and then you're looking at Central Lakes College, that it just seemed like a logical step to also open up ISD 181's properties. But that is something that can be taken out if the commission doesn't like that to be in there, doesn't want to open it up that far. That is up to the commission. Just felt like that this kind of was that fit, again, considering that Franklin is partially owned by the school district. But we'll leave that up to the commission to decide to leave that in there or not.
but just recognize that that's broadened the, seems to have broadened the scope of, from the workshop as I recalled it. So I don't know that I have an opinion on it other than to say that it seems different from what we talked about. So make sure we understand that. So, James, is there anybody online?
There's not.
There is nobody. We are super positive. We have one person in the audience that might actually have a question. So I'm going to open the public hearing at 7:19. Is there anyone that would wish to speak to this topic? Is there anybody sitting in a chair by the director who might want to speak to this topic?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
So at this point, then I'll close the public hearing. We'll call it at 7:20. And then back to discussion then amongst the board. So we've had a conversation already about do we expand or remove the control over the number of units. There were comments and that would say maybe we put that off and be observant and see whether it creates a problem or not. We have pushed off the issue of on-street, and we want to observe and learn. So we've got one opportunity to just experiment and just see whether we have issues that need to be addressed before maybe we would then do another iterative step in this outward, and that could be an opportunity to also address the number of units per area. So is there any other comments that folks would want to make on this? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to recommend these changes to City Council with the editing to the Art Center as discussed. Do I have hear such a motion?
Make such motion.
All right, Gorham, motion second.
I would second such motion.
All right, Woodward, second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. All righty, David, that goes to you.
Awesome. And this will go before to the City Council on June 7th for the first reading of the ordinance. As a reminder, any changes to the ordinance per the city charter requires 2 readings by the City Council before it can be adopted.
All right, thank you. And then with that, we are now welcoming our guests for zoning code update, traditional neighborhood and downtown character areas. David, could you set this up for us, please?
Well, as little as I can. Obviously, Mike Lamb and Jennifer Haskamp, the Swanson Haskamp Consulting Team, are here tonight. They requested to come before you to have a little bit of a further discussion regarding the traditional neighborhood and downtown character areas for the zoning code as they were discussed with the commission on April 28th. I want to have this discussion, and I'll hand it over to Mike and Jennifer in just a second here, kind of to expound on and help them as they look to continue to put the finishing touches on the annotated outline to have to you in soon. I won't put a date on it.
There it is. Well, welcome, Jennifer and Mike. Thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging with us to this point. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to see you all. So as David said, he probably can't set it up extremely well because I told him we didn't have anything for your packet. So a little drama, a little intrigue for the evening for everybody, right? So if you want to go ahead to the next slide. David mentioned the fact that when are we actually going to see the full annotated outline? So we threw the schedule in here so we could talk a little bit and get you kind of, get us all on the same page with respect to where we are today and where we're going over the next couple months. So this is actually the schedule that was in our proposal. It turns out the good news is we're pretty close to on schedule in terms of the timeline, so that's positive. Even though we had some of these strange little hiccups as a result of COVID and not being able to get together and all of that fun stuff. So there is still obviously quite a bit of work to be done, and there's also some hashing out of what engagement looks like that we need to talk with David about in terms of how that progresses. But you'll see on this slide that we've got kind of circled, this is where we're at. We're in this annotated outline period. We really have done a lot of phase one. If you guys recall, we had a memo that was delivered to you. We kind of said, yes, this looks like about the direction we want to head into. We did a lot of existing conditions analysis at our last work session. We took a look at those non-conforming uses, for example, or non-conforming parcels. So we've done a lot of the majority of what was supposed to happen in phase two. There's some deliverables and some other pieces that need to slot into that phase still. But then, of course, we've already started doing some of the work of phase three. So obviously those things kind of talk to each other, so it's not going to be a static line. So generally speaking, we're on schedule. We're very close to being on schedule. The purpose of the meeting tonight is actually to start talking about the specifics of what are going to go into the annotated outline. So Mike actually at the last meeting, the work session, if you guys recall, we kind of took a look at this idea of organizing around character areas. And then how does that work with respect to how the zoning districts actually play with or interplay with those character areas. So tonight Mike's going to talk a little bit about how does the character area relate to the zoning district. And what does that mean, and start looking at actual dimensional standards, et cetera. So we thought we'd chunk it up kind of into two conversations with respect to the annotated outline. So the first one being tonight, the traditional neighborhoods, and then a little bit about the downtown, and the downtown, which I know we all talk about where is the downtown, but where is downtown? We're going to talk about it tonight a little bit in terms of how that works with the districts, and a little bit about the traditional neighborhoods. Then part two of the annotated outline discussion, Mike and I were kicking around and talking about what the right date is, and we need to coordinate with David, but sometime in late June, actually having a work session again that's kind of dedicated just to the full annotated outline. So we have a good solid block of time with you. That maybe is a couple hours, kind of like what we did with the last work session, where we can really look at the entire annotated outline, sort of soup to nuts. So we're thinking that would be in June. Obviously, summer gets tricky with holidays and all of that business. So the idea is... Oh, okay. That's fun. It's like we don't wear masks, and now we can sit by each other. Who knew? All right.
Absurd.
I know, it's like I'm uncomfortable, but I don't know why.
So
All right.
2019.
So anyway, so the idea is we would actually have a good solid work session where we can go through that whole annotated outline. The reason that that's so important is because we want to make sure we have buy-in from what goes into that annotated outline before we start drafting. So from that respect, you can kind of see where we're headed. There's a good chunk of really solid, heavy work that has to happen once the annotated outline kind of gets blessed, if you will, and that's our final phase. So from that respect, that's where we're headed. That's our goal. We're hoping we're going to be able to do that in June sometime. If not, because of holiday schedules or whatever, we'll get it as soon as possible after that, and then we will be off to the races in terms of the draft. So without further ado, I think we can move on to the next slide. And you see these lovely maps and graphics. And with that, I'm going to toss it over to Mike.
Thank you, and good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, and good to see the former council member and planning commission member here with us as well. That's good that somebody is interested in what's going on. So just to follow up on a couple of things that Jennifer said in terms of introducing this tonight, We're continuing that discussion we had on April 28th over at the fire training room, and there was a kind of a broad discussion. It did focus around the character areas and some of the things that we've been seeing with the character areas themselves, and how we use that to provide the basis for future character-based zoning districts, and that's part of what we'll talk about tonight. Traditional neighborhood districts in the downtown area. So we're building towards a full annotated outline. What we want to do tonight is focus on those two specific pieces in a little more detail, hopefully in a way that if you have questions, just we'll take them as we go, if that's okay with everybody. And we're not necessarily we don't necessarily have an ask for you tonight. What we're suggesting to you is this is the direction we're going forward. If it doesn't feel right, it doesn't seem right, kind of the old slogan you see at the airport, if you see something, say something. So we're going to depend on that. And, in the next, as Jennifer said, the next meeting, we'll get into the broader districts and provisions as we put those together. So just to tee up what you're looking at here, obviously we've gone through this non-conforming analysis, and we'll look at a little bit of that. We'll look at some of that in detail tonight, here and there, and we've done our best effort to determine character areas. Some of those still have question marks around them. We had that discussion last time, like the Mills family property down in the southwest area, and we'll continue to work to define some of those particular character areas. And the discussion that in some cases these areas probably wouldn't change much at all. Some of the industrial districts, some of the industrial uses, those things that we see being maintained, probably a lot of the code language standards requirements would not probably change a lot as well. And obviously we're trying to factor in as we go guidance from the future land use, not only from a density standpoint, but also from a location and geography standpoint. And then that all leads towards eventually some character-based zoning districts. So that's sort of the process or the path we're on at this point. So here's the existing outline for your code. There's about 80 sections. And it starts with title and application and definitions and administration. And what we want to do is sort of turn that on its head a little bit. There's some sections here we do have to dive deeper into eventually. But the proposed outline for tonight, at least for discussion purposes, is to, obviously we'd have a title section, then we get right into the districts in terms of the outline. That's sections 50 through 80 currently, residential, commercial, industrial, the overlays, environmental, all those things. That would be followed by general building use and design provisions. Some of those we'd probably incorporate into use tables for the districts themselves. But dive into sections 17 through 37, then the administrative section, and then the non-conforming lots and lot yard provisions. Those would probably get incorporated into the district as well. So that's kind of the abbreviated outline, if you will, for where we are tonight.
If it looks that simple.
It's kind of simple right now.
Left and right are starkly different.
It's all there, yes, left and right. But obviously, some of the provisional standards, some of the specific sections that have some bearing across the city, we'll obviously take a look at those. And one of the things we really want to take a look at are some of the design provisions that are associated with the districts as well. So, James. So tonight, we want to look at what we're calling traditional residential districts, and we'll talk about those in some detail, and the downtown business districts. As we're thinking about that, and as we've had discussions with you and internally with our team, we're in the process of how those different districts get consolidated into more specific character-based districts. In some cases, parts and pieces of different districts will get combined and organized into a little more specific specific standards and requirements. Same with the downtown business districts, and we'll talk about that tonight in terms of town center and town core, and where parts and pieces of those different B districts come to play and they don't come to play. Just as a caveat and as a side, I'm using a lot of different words. They're all semantics at this point. If there are words, phrases, terms, things that you're used to or you have some affinity to, I mean, we're not wedded to any words at this time, any titles tonight, just for your information. Okay, James? You've seen, we shared this with you the last time on a number of areas. This is North Brainerd, and everything in blue outline is non-conforming lots. Everything that's shaded in gray are lots that are non-conforming by area. So we'll talk about this in a little more detail as we get into it. Obviously, you can see that Kingwood there is the first block in color just north of Washington. Okay, next.
The one I
let's
just
go
want to
back.
say one thing about that last map, which is, just as a refresher, we only did a non-conforming analysis on lot area and lot width. And I think we referenced that the last time, so I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. So there's likely other parcels here that are non-conforming. They're just non-conforming for one of the other dimensional standards, and it's not mapped. So this is a snapshot, not a full picture.
At occupancy, they'll 90% will be non-conforming.
Yeah, could you go back one more time?
I believe that to be true. I just wanted to make sure that that's out there, because actually, I mean, not that this looks great, but it doesn't look that bad, right?
Well,
It's probably a lot worse.
well, and that was going to make that point, that most of these lots in gray, we think with amended zoning district standards, that we probably would eliminate non-conforming status for about 80 or 90% of them, I think. We'll see how that works out, but I think that's the case.
Good goal.
Okay, next. It is a goal, absolutely. So I'm just going to share with you a little bit of a little detailed analysis, and you can kind of see where we're going with this in terms of lot, in this case, lot standards and lot widths. These are two different half blocks. I just labeled them A and B for lack of a better word. This is Kingwood is at the top there. Chippewa's to the west. And then you can see that in the lot, the half block A, those lots are basically 50 by 125, so that's 6,250 square feet. The B block, the B half block, 50 by 145, 7,250 square feet. Your lot area requirements here are 7,000 square feet. So the idea that technically, if you look at what your lot requirements are, 50 by 150, the lot depth can't exceed 3 times the width. That's really 7,250 square feet. I think it's 7,250, I think, yeah. 70, no, it's not. It's 7,500 square feet.
7,500 would be the maximum.
Right, it's maximum. So, but you can see that there are common characteristics here. The street boulevard setback and dimensions, the building setbacks, the lot widths, that's a very common denominator, and the building type and height. So there's really, whether it's 5,000, 6,000, or 7,000 square feet, it doesn't change the character of this area. Let's go to the next one. So here's a little block, just a little ways over another block. Here are some lots that are non-conforming, 50 by 100, so 5,000 square foot lots. You look at them from the street, you can see that boulevard relationship, front yard relationship, sidewalks, and the character and the form that's facing the street itself. I mean, again, you wouldn't know if that was a 5 or a 6 or 7,000 square foot lot. You have no idea. Okay, next. Here's even further lots that are 50 by 80, 4,000 square feet. And you can see this is one on the corner. It's tight to its lot. But again, the impression, the character, its contribution to the neighborhood is just as similar as if it were a 5,000 square foot lot or a 6,000 square foot lot. It's the boulevard dimensions, the form of the house itself, its setbacks. Those are the things that we're trying to focus on in terms of the code itself and the ability to accommodate different widths and areas so that a lot of these can be non-conforming. Okay. Now we're getting into even smaller lots, and I think this is beginning to be sort of our watershed. The lot at the top is 37 by 90, so that's 3,300 square feet. Down below, we got a couple of lots next to each other. They're 42 feet wide and 37 feet wide. And you begin to see a little difference there, I mean, character-wise. At the top, that's a really tight lot. The building is, the nice thing about that house is it's served and loaded by an alley, so you don't get that driveway, and that garage is to the house to the south of that particular lot. It's not their garage. And then down below, you can kind of see these are front-loaded units, and they're pretty tight, you know. But again, they're beginning to relate to the character and the area of the neighborhood itself. Okay, next. So let's talk about what we're calling it, for lack of a better term right now, traditional neighborhood 1, and that would reference some of the R1 and some of the R2 districts and low and medium residential land use category. And at least what we're thinking about tonight is that's primarily residential only, TN1. It's consistent, it's uniform, and it would allow a range of residential uses, single family, two family, up to 9 units an acre, which is consistent with your land use plan. We're suggesting that maybe on the corner lots, accessory dwelling units by right, and internally conditional use to an accessory dwelling unit. So that's certainly something we can talk about with a maximum unit size of 650 square feet.
Could you, Mike?
Sure, please.
Could you maybe share the thinking on the corner lot by right? I'm thinking also sight lines and things like that. And
Sure. The thinking mainly is there commonly is a little more area on a corner lot. I think some of the setbacks are a little different on corner lots, so that may be something we need to look at. But the other thing is you've got 2 linear lengths of curbside. So you've got the additional on-street parking if you need it to serve an accessory dwelling unit. Now, obviously parking, I've got that at the bottom of the slide, parking to be determined in all these districts. I think we want to be as progressive as we can about parking. I don't know if you just saw, but Minneapolis eliminated their parking minimums this week. And that's not in this recommendation here tonight, but the idea that, you know, parking is an evolving thing. And so the idea of putting an accessory dwelling unit on a corner then it's just more from a sideline standpoint, but from just a visual standpoint, you've got more frontage to deal with, and that provides some visibility for the unit itself and some breathing room, if you will.
In short, you could also look at it as you have one street side for, you know, the main unit and one street side essentially for the ADU.
Yeah.
The other piece of that I'll say is both, especially in these particular areas, the corner lots have boulevard on 2 sides of frontage, and so even though those aren't calculated in the lot area in terms of the sight lines and the visibility and that stuff, typically you've got 2 boulevards. So like in this case, you can see which sets it back significantly as opposed to when you've got it on an interior lot.
And, you know, with an ADU, that could, I mean, there's a lot of discussions we can have about that, and we can parse that down to some specific standards and requirements. But that could be a standalone thing. It could be above a garage, you know, whatever, however you see that.
That doesn't change the footprint at that point. I was reacting to the possibility of 2 separate, an additional structure, not an over the garage or.
Right. And you know, we can calibrate that. we can easily do that. The second thing I want to point out here is lot size range. We're suggesting here that the TN1 would be between 400 and 7,500 square feet. So then we begin to absorb some of that non-conforming piece. The common denominator again is that lot width, and I have a question mark by that, but by and large, the DNA of that neighborhood, and to some extent the other traditional neighborhoods, is that 50 by 150 lot. I mean, that's sort of the very common dimensions. So let's revert back to the DNA, and then if we need to adjust, we can, so. Okay?
Is it I'm sorry to keep, but the question marks open up possibilities or thoughts. Are there practices where, to deal with the fact that we have a lot of these lot widths that don't conform with the 50, that you could allow a conforming use to be less, but you can't divide an existing parcel down? Do you know what I'm thinking of these tax forfeit parcels that they're really super narrow. It's going to go in as a non-conforming use. How are you going to be able to develop that and so forth? But if we can say that's a conforming lot, consistent with the character. Maybe I'm getting too far in the weeds here, but I'm just maybe looking both to Mike and Jennifer for your experiences, David for your thoughts on that as well.
So, if I can, real quick. So one thing to point out here, what Mike's done and Jennifer have done differently is right now our ordinance would say minimum 50. He has changed it to maximum 50. I will say, because I have the slides up, I got them from Jennifer this afternoon. And so, can I have James jump to the next slide just pretty quickly?
Oh, yeah, sure, please go.
James, can you jump to the next slide? So, to help you understand where he's thinking TN1 is going to go. But looking at this, I do have a quick question for you, Mike, because I haven't seen this, so I can ask questions.
Okay, that's fine.
My concern with the max 50 is you're going to make, some lots are going to become conforming. Are we going to have a trade-off where a chunk of the, especially I look at bluff lots, are suddenly we're trading off that now they're not conforming.
Yeah.
So maybe do we want to consider it to be more like 75 versus, because as you pointed out, like early on in this whole process, North Brainerd was platted at 25-foot wide lots, and you added as many 25s together as you wanted. So maybe would 75 be more appropriate than 50? And I guess I'm throwing that in your lap.
No, it might be. That's why I had a question mark. That's why I used the word max, because we want to maintain the character of the neighborhood, but at the same time allow a little more flexibility in what is there. Yeah, the bluff lots, I get that, and 75 may be the number. That's the whole point of this meeting tonight. It's just like, let's see, we throw something out there, let's see how people react to it. And some of this would apply to TN2, but I think that's a good point, is thinking about it a little bit wider.
Mr. Chair, if I can really quick, going back to your question about, I think your concern is in the current code, when it comes to subdividing, we control that by saying, well, if you're gonna subdivide it to being less than 50 feet wide, you can't do it. This option, if you wanted to go from 50 to 30, or say it was a 60-foot lot, you could, in theory, subdivide to 30-foot lots. So yes, I think this code would, unless we put some more restrictions in there. But I think we don't have to do that, because what then controls that subdivision are still your setbacks. That, I think that Mike was proposing that 25 and 10, you would still say, well, can you fit that in there? There's parking, which, James, you can go back to the last slide. He said parking to be determined. There are those other things at that point you can put into play that would then control whether or not that subdivision could actually happen, because we as staff would look at it and go, you can't fit a house in here of a minimum size with minimum parking and all those kind of things, so you can't subdivide it.
Yep.
So the other piece I want to say is part of getting direction tonight is then going back and actually doing a little bit more GIS analysis to see, for example, on the range right now, he's got 4,000 to 7,500. So Mike and I talked a little bit about this earlier this morning and said, is 4,000 really the right number? If we're trying to reduce the number of nonconformity, right? We'd go back and actually say, okay, that feels maybe about right. Let's now do a calculation and figure out how many lots in that particular zoning area we've identified actually fall under that 4,000. Are we talking 3 or 4, or are we talking a dozen? And so let that help us like refine what that range is to get a better understanding of what are we really going to accomplish. But the first step is throwing this out there and saying, does a range work? Can you see how the range works of having a lower number and a higher number? And then the same thing goes for the frontage. Mike and I talked about this morning, that from my perspective, what's creating this environment or character has more to do with your lot width than your lot depth and how it feels at the frontage. So controlling for the frontage or the width might make more sense than even the depth, right? Because how it feels on the street is really a more direct relationship to how wide the lots are. That's why some of the, like this lot is very small, but it feels pretty gracious because the width is there even though it's shorter.
Yeah, I mean, this could be a 90-foot lot. I mean, it could be 90 feet deep. You wouldn't even, you wouldn't know that from this picture, so. But, yeah, go ahead, David.
And I just had two more things, which I know if we answer them now will probably be, again, a lot of these questions I think we're answering here will then inform the rest of your presentation. Two other things I had a quick question mark, going back to the ADU size, when it comes to what that good number is.
Yep.
If you're including, say, someone, and we'll get to the topic of, someone wants to put it on top of a garage, is that 650 including, are you thinking including the garage, or like, they could have a 20 by 30 garage that includes 20 by, so you got 600 square foot garage space plus a 600 square foot above it, so it's really 1,200 square feet total, but the outline is only 600 square feet.
Yeah, the footprint would be 6 or 650. I mean, garage is obviously a particular, permitted use, but the ADU is, habitable. It's a habitable conditioned space, so that would be different from the.
So
garage.
you're looking at this point would be 650 square foot footprint.
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
But that footprint could be on top of the garage space.
Yeah, I'm just clarifying that right now because I think our code a lot of reads right now is total square footage.
Yeah.
What you're talking about here is footprint, not total square footage. I just wanted to clarify that.
Footprint that allows an accessory dwelling unit, yes.
And the other last one I had was on front yard encroachment. You have 8 feet. I just wanted to clarify, are you saying you can be within 8 feet of the property line, or you're reducing that 20 feet by 8 feet, so your front setback would then be 12 feet?
Correct.
12 feet?
12 feet, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can reduce the front yard setback by 8 feet.
Yeah, and that's for a porch, particularly for like a porch or an overhang or something of that nature, that you don't get penalized for that.
Yep. And I'll just point out our code currently allows it to be 2 feet.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's, and again, that, all these are numbers that we can, push up and down the dial. And, the main, James, all right, can you go back one more, James? Oh, never mind, that's fine. Go back to the same one, sorry. Yeah, that's good. All right, so, all these numbers can be dialed and calibrated the way, and we'll get there at some point and we'll put this into a graphic table so it'll be a lot easier to read and compare notes. And the thing is I think the challenge for all of us is going to be comparing the apples of the old code to the oranges of the new code, to put it in a colloquial term. But generally, generally, Mr. Chair, we're not asking to dive too deep here with the numbers, but just that, are we headed in the right direction? Does it seem reasonable response to what would be a traditional neighborhood district? So that's kind of where we are with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's go to the next one, James. So if you map it, and David blew my surprise, I'm going to show you now the map part of it, but the idea that most of North Brainerd would be this new Tn2 district. We would focus Tn2 on essentially what is Kingwood, most of what is Kingwood, and that we'll talk about that next. But that that begins to allow commercial uses, which TN1 does not, okay? And so this would essentially be how we begin to map some of these districts. Okay, let's go to the next. So TN2, again, referencing the neighborhood mixed and mixed residential land use categories. This is a very similar approach to the TN1, the traditional neighborhood, except that it allows commercial uses. And again, we've got some numbers here that we're playing with. We're not really, we haven't settled on or we haven't resolved yet. But again, a couple of things that are different: single family or residential uses up to 20 units an acre. Okay, so now we're starting to overlap with some of the other districts and some of the other land use categories. You see a lot with max here, 75. Again, front yards, encroachments, accessory dwelling units, non-residential uses, and I'm throwing in here an FAR, or floor area ratio, of 0.45. So if you have a 10,000 square foot lot, which you may or may not have in this district, you could develop up to 4,500 square feet of it. Okay, that's how that works. I don't know if you're not currently using FAR here, are you? In Brainerd, right? Okay. So non-residential uses and non-residential lot sizes need to be determined. I think to some extent, I'm leaning towards we don't have a minimum or maximum lot size in this district. And then again, parking spaces, we need to figure kind of what is the sweet spot there for the TN2. In some cases, we may not need to increase or amend the parking standards. We're going to look at parking all over, obviously. And it'll be good to get some feedback from your parking committee too. I don't know where you guys are with that, but we can talk to David about that. But if you look in the photo there, I mean, this is sort of representative of the TN2. There's a religious building on one end, the west end, single family detached in the middle, and a multi-family unit on the far right-hand side. So the idea of that mix, I mean, those things are compatible all day long. Obviously you don't have these huge parking demands. If one of those single family houses wants to get converted into a yoga studio or a sewing shop or whatever it might be. What did I see on Oak coming in? I forget, but I'll remember it. So that would certainly be permitted with the code, okay? And it, again, maintains sort of the scale and the character, the form of the street itself. So that's TN2. Let's go to the next slide, James. So that is showing Kingwood as a TN2 district. Okay, so again, parking we're going to have to think about parking there. We're going to have to calibrate that a bit. But the notion that we've got commercial next to residential, next to essential services or religious or institutional uses is perfectly fine. It's just the way that works. And that applies to Kingwood. It applies to some of the specific areas in Northeast Brainerd, and we'll show you, it applies to parts of Oak Street as well. Any thoughts, comments, questions about that? Okay, let's go to the next one, James. So here's Northeast Brainerd and suggesting where some of the TN2 districts would occur. And I apologize, we don't have the streets labeled here. We know Mill Avenue goes north-south on those two TN2 districts. Part of Washington down in the lower left-hand corner could potentially be a TN2. There's some older remnant patterns there that I think we could hang on to. Some of it's very auto-oriented and drive-through kinds of patterns. Up to the north, up there where I think it's a Holiday or a Speedway or something like that up there. Yeah. And then another convenience store back to the east there. So again, those are the places where we could have a mix of uses and probably a little bit higher density in terms of residential. They're fairly compact, they're fairly well defined at this point. Doesn't mean we can't think them through in terms of their actual geographic boundaries, but again, it's a place to start and an example of what we're thinking about. Yeah.
If I may, Mr. Chair, to Mike, did you consider looking at this, the parcels along Northwest, well, actually, Fifth Avenue, I guess not North, Fifth Avenue Northeast, and then East Street, so the 2 blocks, or the 2 strips that kind of outline the Cub and that shopping area, did you consider those for TN2? Considering their relation to other commercial, it could, in my mind, it kind of seems like it potentially could serve again as that transition, where those I see, like for example, there's one house right next to the Speedway there. I guess personally I don't see why that would be a concern, just like on Kingwood, why that would be a problem if that someone wanted to turn that house into a yoga studio or, again, that light commercial.
Yeah, and that's a good question, and obviously we didn't necessarily suggest, we're not necessarily suggesting this is the final zoning map, but the idea of, okay, what it would look like if we begin to think about TN1, TN2, and that was our sort of first blush at it. I think as we get into blocks and half blocks and transitions, that the TN2 could serve very well some transitional areas for back into the neighborhood, for sure. But the larger, the big box commercial pieces, that's something we're going to take on too, and some of it has to go somewhere, right? So, any other thoughts or questions about that?
I think that's a good addition. Seeing what you've got for the TN2, and I know it's not the final, but I agree with that suggestion. That's a perfect, similar TN2.
Okay.
Yeah, D and Northwest, D and Fifth Avenue, yep. Mm-hmm.
So your alley's going east-west there, are you just thinking about the first couple parcels on the block, or you?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the parcels kind of like on the west side, immediately on the west side of Fifth Avenue Northeast.
I'm looking here, is that the divider between the TN1 and the white on this map? I'm thinking it is.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those alleys go east-west on that west side of Fifth.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So it would, I'm just trying to imagine how would you take the whole block as a result, or would you take the first few houses on?
And that's where I think we could get into that more granular later date. My thought was just like that might be a throw it out there as a consideration for that side, and then even I mentioned E, which would be the back side of Cub. I think maybe there's a little more of a divider where maybe that doesn't necessarily be a TN2. Mm-hmm. I just felt like, again, if you take that left or right, depending on which direction you're going on 210 on to Northwest Fifth, you've got Speedway on your right, you got McDonald's and Dairy Queen, and then you've got Cashwise Liquor and all that. It just kind of seemed to fit where you could put a TN2 on the other side of the street as a good transition.
Yeah, and it may even work really well with some of the odd lot sizes too. So that's a good point. And we'll have a WWE drag down on the map boundaries, I'm sure, at some point. That'll be fun.
Smackdown is.
It's Smackdown, that's what it was, not drag down.
Gloves off. Oh.
Okay, let's go to the next one. See where we are. So, okay, here's Oak Street, and Jennifer and I had a little discussion about this the other day, but again, this is primarily the area south of the Northern Pacific Center and getting further south than, I'm going to say Quince, but I may be wrong about that. But that's Oak Street where the TN2 is overlaid, not overlaid, but is shown as a boundary, which includes, I'm going to get this wrong, Harrison School?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, I got it right. Pretty good. And miracles never cease. But the idea here is We've got some home occupations on this street. We've got a couple auto-oriented repair kinds of things. We've got 2-story commercial buildings. We got some, we've got a little bit of everything. We got a couple of houses that are being used for non-residential purposes. So the idea that if you're in that 1 block deep Tn2, that there's the commercial range of uses is allowed. The parking standards will probably be different, and the idea that the reason we included the school is the idea that it's very common to see older school buildings. I know there's been some investment put in that school, but years down the road, does that building get converted? And if so, does this code allow that to happen?
Franklin Center.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been in, I think it was Preston, Minnesota, where I stayed in an old school that got converted into a B&B. So those kinds of things that, the code doesn't want to be an obstacle for that, but at the same time, how do we incorporate it into the Tn2 district that would allow those conversions to happen? So that's a question we still have. But a fairly finite area here. It's mostly residential and might allow. I know there's at least one lot here that has 2 residential units on it. I don't think I've quite dug to the bottom of that yet. Or you knew about it, I think.
We discussed it at the workshop. And
we did. And but this would allow some organic and incremental density over time, and some organic allowance of small commercial type uses as well. So that's Tn1 and Tn2. Now, if you go just to the west of this, you make the transition into sort of parts of downtown, and the southeast edge of downtown is a more traditional pattern. It's got a number of detached single-family units to it, but I don't know yet if it's really a Tn1 or a Tn2 yet. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but there is a transition there beyond the linear open space. Okay, let's go to the next one, James. So that's sort of the discussion we want to have with residential, okay, traditional residential, and there's 3 specific areas. There may be a couple others that we will want to think about. But when we back up and think about residential along the range of uses or the range of sizes, I'll say. So we've got the traditional neighborhood lot at 50 by 150. As we move up the scale, what we're referring to as contemporary residential is your typical R1A. We're using that word as a placeholder, contemporary. We go from there to what we're referring to as garden living, which is kind of a combination of rural residential and rural estate, or a couple of those different distinctions, up to about 5 acres. Anything beyond that is what we're referring to as rural living. That's a large lot. Somebody's way out there. We know we've got that in north and northwest
Probably
city.
doesn't have utilities.
Probably doesn't have utilities, probably has a septic, ... But it's a big tract of land that isn't assumed to be urbanized anytime soon. So that's sort of the scale. We're trying to encompass everything down here all the way out to there, and with a few general categories. That will continue to need some tweaking as well, but that's kind of the way we're thinking about it right now.
I like it. You went from like 9 residential districts to 4. I like
maybe.
Residential. I should say character. You went down to 4 character areas. Obviously, we break it down in, but I like that.
But we know that I can't remember if it's rural residential, rural. It's rural. I mean, we know all of that's non-conforming.
Yeah.
So we're trying to at least place that into a category, rural living, that we think would solve that non-conforming use as well. Okay? So that's just a preview of things to come next time. All right? So let's go.
You have to question, Mr.
please.
Chair.
Did I hear you correctly say contemporary residential would be roughly equivalent to R1?
Roughly. And it, again, we're suggesting that's anything above 7,500 square feet to about half an acre. And we're just using that term contemporary as a lack of another term to use. Because Jennifer really liked it a lot, so I said so I had to use it, so.
We're talking about it as suburban, but I kind of like contemporary better. But
So-
it could be anything.
And contemporary
I like
really
contemporary.
is, just talks about a development era. It's not a architectural style or a building palette or anything like that. It's just that, these homes were built in the 70s and the 80s and on, and they're different than what was built earlier, so. Okay, so what's next? All right, let's stop there. Any thoughts, comments, darts about residential at this point, particularly traditional residential? Sort of head in the right direction? Okay. Okay, good. So you want to talk about downtown? Should we take a straw poll? So in this view, this constitutes what we think is the town center for Brainerd. It's the river on one side, it's the linear open space on the right, which I apologize, I don't have a name for.
The whole?
No, the green, where the recreational path is, trail is.
That's the whole.
No, to the east of that.
Are you talking about that big green space
No.
between 11, was that 10th and then 13th? Like that green space right there where his cursor is?
Yeah. And there's a trail in there, there's a recreational path trail.
Oh yeah, it also kind of falls into a hole.
Yeah.
It's a hole.
Anyway, that represents how we see
So
downtown.
that's our new character area.
Yeah.
The whole.
The whole.
Got it. All right.
The railroad corridor is to the north, and then we get down to, there's Oak and maybe one block south of Oak, more or less. You can see, just by the tree, just by the urban canopy, you can see where the smaller single-family residential begins to pop up, right? That's that sort of southeast part of downtown. So that's the town center, and then we'll work our way into what I'm calling the town core, for, again, lack of a better term. And so I guess I'll just throw out a question here. Does this seem like this encompasses the downtown of Brainerd in this photo?
Sure looks like central.
Yep.
I think town center is a pretty safe word there, Mike. Just keep using that word, that phrase.
Central Business District? Does that include that in this photo, you think?
I don't know if I'd call it the central business, only because when you go west of Northwest, really, once you go west of 6th, it turns really into your government district.
It does, but that's part of the,
That's why I like the town center.
that's a part of my mind, that's part of the larger town center.
Town center is a good term because it doesn't exclude a business that's not close enough to one of the boundaries.
I think if we continue using the TC word is better than using the D word right now.
Okay, all right, well, let's hang on that for a while. So let's go to the next one, James. So I just threw this out here for fun because it's fun to look at history, right? Because we're all part of history, right? So this is 1917, and what's interesting about this, that's Front Street at the very top, and then there's Laurel, then there's Maple, and then there's Norwood, right? So what is 8th today was Broadway then. So one of our recommendations is to rechange the name again. No, I'm just kidding. But you can see the concentration on Front Street because that was the transportation mode, and development tends to follow the transportation mode, right? And in the Sanborn maps, the colors represent the building materials. So all this red is masonry, brick, that sort of construction type. Everything in yellow is a wood frame building, okay? So that yellow, we typically would we default to go, oh, that's all residential. Well, it's not all residential. However, if you look south of Laurel on this map, you can see that a lot of it is residential. It's very small residential frame buildings. So the only reason I threw that out there was it's been a very common occurrence for residential to populate downtown, particularly the town center, and in some cases the town core. So that's the only reason. That's all I got to say about that. All right, let's go to the next one.
I will point out, I find it interesting, according to that map,
Yeah.
that a lot of the buildings that are gone now were the brick ones.
Interesting, yeah. So, so thanks, James. So here's what we're looking at for the town center. This is our character map, character areas map. You can see Washington along the top there in red. The pink is the town, again, the town center more or less. Purple is the town core.
You have them flipped in your...
I know, and I did that just to see if people were paying attention. And you were. Thank you so much. Good job.
I heard Don breathe, so I knew.
I did. I did.
Yeah, that was a slight error in graphic design there. And then you can see to the southeast again, the residential pattern is popping up. That's very traditional in nature. That to me in the photo, all the blue is basically institutional uses. I think that's what we call. No, we didn't call them that. We call community uses. Yeah, community character. And essentially all of that would be part of what we're calling the town center. Okay, so let's go to the next one.
Ask you a question quickly.
Please. Oh no, go back.
Potential
Absolutely.
can of worms.
Please.
I'm just curious the methodology, where I noticed, James, can you go back a slide? You added the north side of Front and the south side of Maple as town core. And granted, I know you had to stop somewhere, but I'm just curious why the east side of 8th didn't get in. I understand. I kind of understand why the west side of 6th didn't, because I feel like there is a noticeable change. But I'm curious as why the east side of 8th.
I think the pattern breaks down east of 8th. And I'll get into that a little bit in detail in a minute, and it does on the west too. But again, to me, Norwood is completely a very residential pattern. As you go further north, it changes, but it changes in kind of chunks.
And I just bring that up because I know you concept planned the
Thrifty White.
Mm-hmm. I'll talk about later. We might be having something coming before Planning Commission soon. Is in this concept, again, we're going to get granular more later on what would design standards be.
Yep.
But are you foreseeing, since that's considered town center, not town core, I feel like that lot in relation to downtown probably should have some familiarity to downtown. But in this map could potentially be, I don't want to say drastically different, but different.
I think the distinction I'm going to make with it tonight is the town center is going to be more residential friendly in a broad sense. So the notion that if whatever gets developed at Thrifty White, if it's all just a residential building and no commercial uses, boom, it's right there. It reinforces the corner. It reinforces the frontage that we have on Laurel. It reinforces extending that pattern.
So in short, town center would allow first floor residential.
Correct.
And we
Thank you, Mr. Director. And we talked about this last time on April 28th about the idea of, it's common for Euclidean downtown CBD districts to allow residential not on the first floor. And that's very common all throughout Minnesota. You can see it. I'm working with Buffalo right now. We're having that argument right now. And we also talked about, I think was someone from the downtown group was talking about, well, I'd like to live downtown and work in my building, that kind of a thing. Okay, was it Commissioner Woodward? Okay. I thought it might have been you. But the idea that, maybe part of that first floor could be residential, maybe part of it could be parking. That's another thing that we're seeing trends in the metro is developers building these multi-use buildings. They can't park them. They may not be able to park them economically underneath, so they're parking the first floor, and the cities are letting them do that. They treat the facade like it's something, but in relief, it's just a facade for parking. And I don't know if I like that a lot because it doesn't activate the street very well, but sometimes you have to give and take a little bit. But the idea that the town center, to me, wants to be much more accommodating and open to residential investment, a la the Thrifty White, since we have a real world example. So that, and we'll get into that right now, David. So let's go to the next one, James. So town center, allowable uses: commercial, retail, office, attached residential, multifamily residential, with less emphasis to me on light industrial. It starts to begin to feel light industrial in places, but we want to regulate this to some extent with building frontage types, and you can see 3 of them in the bottom there: typical store or shop frontage, a common entry, which would be a mixed-use building or a multifamily building, and a stoop frontage that could accommodate, say, attached single-family residential in the downtown area. And then, again, thinking about the relationship to the street, we got to get the frontage right here, because we have a lot of gaps beyond Laurel, beyond Laurel, where there's a lot of surface parking. There's potential for investment. I think you talked about, David, well, how can we think about some of these smaller surface lots? Does the code allow them to be redeveloped in some form or fashion? I think we can think about that in the larger town center area. Let's see if I got another one. What's next, James? Yeah, so here's exactly what I'm talking about. This is Maple, and the idea that there's some very large lots here that in some cases, I came by the Bremer Bank one, it was pretty full today. But these things will continue to transition. Can we have a code that says, well, this use is transitioning, so I can put a residential building on this place and allow it to, again, reinforce and front the public realm in downtown, as opposed to just surface parking or part of a lot. Typically, you can shoehorn in a double-loaded quarter building in 60 feet, and so you can see some of that parking dimension is shown in some of these outlined areas. And you also see on 8th a pretty broad, I didn't mean to say broad as in Broadway, but a pretty generous boulevard there as well that really helps to make some of that transition and reinforce the frontage. So again, that's the whole notion there. So the code, so we embed in the code the ability for this area to continue to grow and change in a positive way. Okay? So let's go to the next one. So now we can talk about town core. So we want to go back. Anybody want to say anything about town center in terms of boundaries or uses or maybe philosophy, the philosophical ideas of town center? No?
Well, on the philosophy of it, I've read a lot of different reports that say you can't have a healthy, thriving town center or downtown area without a bookstore. So I like that the bookstore is right in the middle. Everything radiates out from the bookstore, so I'm just sitting over here smiling.
That was the music store is where I was coming from. I don't know.
Well, I would certainly echo that, Commissioner, with the caveat, the corollary that we need people to read those books too. So let's put them downtown, right? So they can live there and read the books. So okay, let's make the transition to town core. And again, this is sort of my perception of it. And listening to David, it obviously is going to take a turn in one direction or the other. But this is essentially 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and then from the half block of Front all the way down to the middle block of Maple. And that's more or less 9 square blocks. And it pretty much overlaps some of the earlier investments you've made in downtown, the core that I think that's on your kiosk in downtown. I think that's the word that is used. And so here, the idea that there's a shop frontage and there's a common entry frontage. And do we allow residential on the ground floor or not? I mean, that's not the question, but it is a question. And obviously the location. Let's go to the next one real quick, next view. So this is what we're trying to code for. This is the 100% street. Buildings have a very specific character. They reinforce the physical public realm. And, there's some gaps here and there, but in fact, interestingly, in the core, the two major undeveloped lots are both city lots, and they're both parking lots on Laurel.
They're both buildings that burned down and became parking lots.
Right. Yeah, I didn't know about that. But nonetheless, those are the two lots. Let's go to the next one. So this is what we're trying to code for in the core. Height, transparency, materials to a certain extent. I don't think we're going to get all carried away about that. Building frontage, which is huge, and then the public realm. And you can see the investments in the public realm here. Brickwork and landscaping and lighting and benches and those kinds of things. And for better or for worse, this may not be the most prime example of a building in downtown, but it is a good example. It's got the shop frontage. It's got height. It's got, potential units over the ground floor, and it reinforces the street very well. So that's what we're trying to code for. Anything else, anything else is secondary, is what I would say. Okay? So let's stay on that, James, for just a second. So that's sort of the essence, the core. The notion is we want the entire core to look like this at some point in time. And the best parts of it do look like that today, on Laurel. It's very consistent, except for the areas I pointed out. And can we expect that entire 9+ square blocks to be this way? We would like to, but I think that's going to be where we gerrymander the boundary, and where coding for this condition is going to be certainly limited. If we could have mixed-use buildings a block off of Laurel, and it provides more residential, or even just a multifamily building, that may be really good for the core. But we'll take a look at that. It's a weird time. The first time I was ever in these chambers, I had a mask on. And now we don't, which is really cool. But retail is amazing. It's amazing the evolution it's going through right now. I've heard more than one occasion of where there's no more demand for office for a while, period. And so part of the code needs to think about maintaining this character, but it also needs to maintain some flexibility as well. So
to that point, I was on a webinar roundtable a month ago, done by the Economic Development Association of Minnesota, and what was discussed there was kind of this, and how is COVID changing things. And to that point, what it's being seen is office space, and even to an extent retail, are kind of being paused, if not gone away from. And the funny thing is actually the manufacturing side is taking off because of the internet-based and home-based businesses that people are going to. Manufacturing distribution can't find enough space, and retail space at best is holding pat.
Yep. Yeah. And I think the flip side of that coin is the equity-based equation, where you can allow smaller mom and pop shops or smaller incremental entrepreneurs that have the ability to enter the market in an economical way, and that's something that could happen in some of the Tn2 districts where we get people that have a startup and they're doing it out of their house, or they're doing it in front of their house, or they're, those kinds of things. And you can drive around any small town anywhere and you can see where they added the business onto the house. See that? You can probably drive by one when you leave here tonight. And that used to be perfectly fine. It's probably not as fine today, but that's equitable. That's an equitable increment of investment and development in a local community. So,
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Sure.
With the, with the statement that Mike just made, isn't that a good argument for having like retail in front and possibly have the residential behind to, to promote that type of growth? Because, when you think about it, in the days gone by, a lot of times you had the shop and the housing was right on top. So thinking that, and with retail the way, if it's going the way it is, to be able to have some of the residential housing behind that.
and you're speaking specifically about the downtown, the core, to
Yeah,
some
I was
extent.
thinking, yes.
Yeah. And one of the building types that would apply there is a live-work unit where you would have some type of shop, studio, whatever out front, and you're either behind or above. Part of that is just the ability for that owner to enter the marketplace economically, and that's sometimes you already own a house, you want to do that. You don't necessarily own a live-work unit in downtown. In fact, there probably aren't. There are live-work units in downtown, but they're probably disguised in a building like this, that is, or you're not in that situation.
No, but I have walked through several buildings and people were living in the back of.
Sure.
And it's just, it would be nice if that was a conforming use.
Right. So.
Yeah, I guess part of it to me, and that marries super well into the statement I was going to make, which is if you zone based on these things, which really are about the physical characteristics of what it feels like and what it looks like, the use becomes secondary, as opposed to a lot of current zoning codes are written where really the use was what the driver was, as opposed to the physical characteristics. So like in a traditional Euclidean zoning, it's all use-based for the most part, and it's like a single use, right? This is industrial, this is house, this is business, this is retail. And that's how it was structured, so it put the use at the forefront of, that will work as long as the uses are all playing nice together. As opposed to, this kind of takes the approach of, you're zoning based on what you want it to feel like and what the physical characteristics are supposed to be, and then use becomes the secondary. So it's kind of like flipping it entirely on its head from the perspective of what you're coding for. It's not saying that the uses aren't important, but they're secondary to what the physical environment feels like. And so things like, if there was a residential unit that happened to hang out behind one of these shops, does that change how it feels or the physical characteristic? Not at all. In fact, what it might do is bring more activity to downtown or the core on a more regular basis, right? But it doesn't change it. The other thing is, 10 years from now, if the market does another flip-flop, it doesn't preclude you from changing what the use of the building is, and you still retain the character piece of it. And so it has the ability to be more market responsive than if you're zoning for use first.
It makes us more resilient if we have another flip in the market. We won't end up with a dead downtown. We'll have a downtown that adapts and keeps its form.
Right, exactly.
Chair,
Yes, Mr. Erickson.
I just want to weigh in on that too. For all the reasons that have been said, I think it's at least worth exploring that. If not, I'll just say I think it's a good idea at this point. In addition, I would add to it what you mentioned, David, about working from home. I think rural areas are so poised for growth, or are and will be experiencing explosive growth, mainly because of that factor. And so I think it supports more of an infill residential development, just as we were talking about with Tn1 and Tn2, is that ancillary unit, very similar. It speaks to that density and infill. And so for not only these business reasons, but also to accommodate that residential growth that I think we're going to be experiencing.
And so I would say, I would venture the comment that our town core, as I've shown it tonight, might be too big. Just saying. No, I'm just saying.
Way to be provocative.
He's just looking for a reaction.
No, James, let's go back to the town core map for a second, and then we'll wrap this up. There we go. So it may be that the town core is really Front and Laurel. And then when you get to the half block behind, south of Laurel, it starts to change pretty quickly. And maybe we allow more flexibility there. Still reinforcing the frontage and the walkable characteristics of investment on the lots and blocks, but we are not constricted to just commercial retail on the ground floor. And that, I think that'd be worth talking about. So
your town center, so in other words, it becomes, you slide it into town center, right?
Right.
So
correct.
To the east here and into the west, you could have sort of those residential kinds of ground floor activities. And now you're saying maybe we could bring it up from Norwood up closer.
Maybe so. And again, we'll have that smackdown meeting when we do that. But you can find residential buildings just about every block downtown except for Laurel. I mean, there's one over in the county, next to the county courthouse, just 2 blocks south of here on Laurel, so there's plenty of evidence and remnants of residential in downtown. And, that's just, if we can get more people living in downtown, that's just a bonus for everybody, I think. So let's wrap up, James. The last slide was back to our chart on districts. Again, traditional residential districts, we talked about those tonight, a little bit about downtown and how some of those business districts are going to be absorbed into what we're thinking as town center and town core, and a little bit of thought about the broader residential character districts as we get into those, and we'll get into more detail with those next time. So with that, I will conclude my comments, Mr. Chair.
Your TND is traditional neighborhood district, is that the D, what's, so the connecting back up?
On the right column, you have TND1,
Yeah,
TND2.
I'm just looking, this is sort of how you're imagining the character area on.
Correct. On the right, on the left-hand side is our current sections and districts. On the right-hand side is what we're thinking would be, say rural agricultural district, we're calling that rural living. The rural residential and the single-family estate, we're kind of combining that into what we're calling a garden district or garden living. And then we get into the traditional neighborhood districts. I've got a third one up there, which might be for some greenfield sites, whether that's conservation related like we talked about last time, or it's more a traditional neighborhood on a greenfield site. So there may be a little more spice to that sauce, so to speak. And then we get into R1 A, which is kind of what we're referring to as contemporary. So
my eye was simply drawn to the B1, B2, where you have the question is whether you just throw those into the traditional neighborhood.
I think
2 categories.
Yes, I think some of the parts and pieces of that would fit very well in the TN2. So we got to parse that out.
Cool. Well, thank you for that. Are there questions that folks have after that? David, do you have any additions that you would like to make to that presentation?
To this conversation? No.
Okay.
One question.
Mr. Erickson.
And maybe we'll get into this more, but R1A, what sort of density are we talking? Strictly single family? Or is there,
That's primarily single family up to 10,000 square foot lots. It's single family, again, suburban pattern, what's going on now on the edge, on some of the increments. But I sort of see the wheels turning in your mind about that.
there's some areas there I would like to potentially see some ancillary and or even owner occupied.
So-
duplex might be too much, but even a half, like an owner occupied.
So if I can, Mr. Chair, I'm gonna jump to earlier in their presentation where Jennifer and Mike were talking about like the TN1. If you notice there, I think it's slide 11, James, if you can, yeah. One of the things that how this code changes too is instead of talking single family, multifamily, we talk units. So then you have and you'll see uses for TN1, single family, two family, multifamily. So whereas right now is this R1, these areas are all zoned R1 right now. So it's only single family. What this would change, it would still allow the single family, but it would also allow a multifamily, but then how you calculate it is based on that 9 units an acre. So if you have a lot that's, a quarter of an acre, well, actually most of these lots are like 0.18 acres. You do, 9 times 0.18, and you get 1.6 units. So it would have to stay single family. That's kind of how you would calculate that, is you'd calculate more based off of the size of the lot and the density versus saying you can have 2 units, 4 units. We say, based off of the size of this lot and the density in the area, you can have
Also
2 units, 3 units, 4 units.
here, but also in the contemporary.
Yep, contemporary
Okay.
would have a similar, and I think if you went to slide 13, James, had the same thing, is up to 20 units an acre. So again, now we're talking, that's for TN2. It's
Yes,
TN2.
TN2.
Contemporary, they don't have in here, but it would probably have a similar calculation where it'd be so many units an acre.
Right, so Mr. Chair, members of the commission, so what you would do is the same type of calculation, but you match it up with your density ranges that are in your future land use plan.
Okay.
So you may end up with a duplex, it could happen, if you have
The lot's big enough.
if the lot's big enough and it's on the corner or whatever it is,
Okay.
or, maybe you do have an accessory dwelling unit that, sits on that parcel and it works just fine and fits into the character. So it's more of a, or you may say because it's that, and I haven't talked to Mike about this, but like some places will say, all right, well, it's not a permitted by right, it's a conditional use, but it is something that we'll consider based on where it sits within the, so I mean, there's tools that are available that could go into that designation.
Thank you. I like that, and just for where I'm coming from, I just think there's certain areas of R1A that would blend into that, and again, just along this kind of notion of increased residential growth and density.
Other questions for our guests? Hearing and seeing none, thank you very much, Mike and Jennifer, for making the time to come up here, sitting through our entire meeting tonight. Loving every minute of it.
Always good to be here.
So,
Thank you.
with that, I think we're on to public forum. James, is there anybody online? Okay, we will dispense with the public forum at this point, open and closed at 8:40. Community Development Director's report, David.
I'll be really quick, Mr. Chair. Just a couple updates of previous items that have come before the commission. Obviously, the final plat for Brainerd Oaks, the preliminary plat for Northtown, as well as the variance associated with that. Again, that was Block 9. It was approved by the City Council. The final plat will be submitted at a later date. The patio resolution and CUPs that the Planning Commission reviewed in April 21st were also both approved by the City Council. And the decision not to proceed with Section 900 text amendment was upheld by the City Council as well. Just a reminder, and we have it there to adjourn to. This evening is the special meeting on next Wednesday, the 26th at 7 p.m. here in the council chambers to consider the Country Manor development. And then finally, just kind of a little bit of a teaser for the June meeting. I believe it's June 16th that you'll be meeting. Is the developer will be present to present a conceptual plan for a downtown development, may or may not be the Thrifty White property. To come before the planning commission, just kind of let the planning commission know what they're looking at doing. They're working on putting together a package for some tax credits, and what they're looking for is kind of bring it before the planning commission, get your thoughts, and not necessarily your approval, but your support for the project. They'll then go to the council and then also the HRA board for their support, as well as they look forward to submitting packages for getting tax credits for that future development.
So this is sort of like a pre-design.
Yeah, pretty much they're going to bring you and kind of bring up, here's what our concept is, here's what we're looking to do, are you in support of that? They're not, again, looking you to approve the project, but approve the concept of the project, that you're in support of it. Not obviously knowing that there's a lot more work to do of design and all those things. And that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Questions for the director?
I have a super quick question, Mr. Chair. Where is Country Manor? Is that north of Northtown?
Yep. So Country Manor, and those documents will be coming out in the next day or so for you all to start reviewing. Staff have been working with Country Manor for about 2 years on this project, vetting this project very thoroughly. So there's about 60 acres just north of Northtown. There's about 50 acres, and then there's about a 10-acre lot that stretches out to Beaver Dam, and this will be accessed off of Beaver Dam. But the main development will be just north of Northtown, of like Twin Street, if you think about it that way.
And related to that, so as a plan unit development, you'll have the documents to us. We don't have a very robust section of our code on. I'm looking at 3: purpose, application, and procedure. This would be the first one that I've sat through. I don't know if that's true of others here or not. So, ability to prepare for that. So if that's part of your pack going out, that would be very helpful for me.
Yep, we'll walk you. I'll have it make sure it's pretty thorough, and as well as that purpose. The purpose of that special meeting, and I'll reiterate next week, is really to give the people of Country Manor an opportunity to come before you, and probably want to have a special meeting solely dedicated to them. Kind of present who they are, what they want to do. We'll walk you through their development very thoroughly, and then give you the opportunity to kind of discuss and ask questions of that development. At this stage, a little bit of history quickly. PUDs per the code, they kind of have 3 stages: a preliminary stage, a design stage, and a final stage. Where we are at is the code does allow to go kind of straight to step 2. Because we as staff have already kind of done step 1. So we're going to go straight to step 2, which is the design stage of really going into, they have it platted, they have pretty much civils and architectural and electrical and utilities, all that's already done for them. They're literally looking to get, your feedback, your kind of approval of the plan as it stands now. And then they would end up coming back for the actual the final stage plan, probably more like in the fall. They want to get the development stage done, go out for bids on the project, figure out where costs come back. In the meantime, working with city council and potentially some financing discussions, and then come back when they're ready to actually start submitting for building permits and things in the fall.
I'm thinking that this would have some opportunity to address issues like we dealt with some outlots at our previous meeting. That this discussion process and this review process, as you're thinking about the overall business plan and the layout and yada yada, that we can be thinking about these kinds of other issues, that maybe we head them off in a way that identifies a potential issue like that. Early in the process. The early is the emphasis in this PUD process, so that as you like the platting process, as you get closer and closer to the final, it's going to change. It's going to be less dynamic.
Exactly.
Okay. Very good. All right, thank you, David. Are there, next item on our agenda, commissioner questions and comments? Do we have questions or comments from the commissioners? Teresa?
On the sober houses, I guess it keeps sticking in my mind that they have to go into places that are walkable, and they have to go into places where people can bike to employment, where they can make that transition. And there are a limited number of places, but I want to applaud everyone's efforts for our development process and our planning process in the city to make our community a better place for people to make that transition forward. Because if we don't have a place where we're making that transition forward, we're cutting people off, which makes them fall backwards. So I think we're bringing our community into a better place.
Thank you.
So, thanks, everyone.
Mr. Erickson? Mr. Gorham?
Nothing.
All right, and same here. All right, well, very good. So I'm looking at this point for a motion to adjourn to our special meeting on Wednesday, May 26th, 7 p.m. And I have Gorham making a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, Woodward second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? We're out of here. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, commissioners, for letting me speak.